What's going on, guys? This is Foresight Capital, and today I wanted to give a quick update on the Palantir trade. So we closed down today about 2% to $25.92 per share, and we saw yet another rise in aftermarket hours to about 26.09, and we basically followed the same pattern that we've been following for the past week and a half or so, of a decline in price followed by consolidation before yet another decline. Now, this consolidation that happened for about a week was really due to trading within the wedge, but after breaking out of the wedge, we saw yet another decline and consolidation, more decline and consolidation. So this has just been a continuous pattern for Palantir. What's interesting is we also saw yet another pre-market hours spike. So this was at 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We actually saw a high in Palantir of about $26.78. But as the market opened, the sell-off continued and then ultimately spiked a little bit throughout the day. And this has just been the pattern that Palantir has been following for quite some time now, setting lower lows and not really setting higher highs. So we've seen a slow grind down in price, and I think we're ultimately going to continue to see that until we reach this $24.50 per share level. We've got what would be considered a bearish setup now, with the 50-period moving average and the 200-period moving average both potentially acting as resistance for the stock. So we've got multiple price levels that we really need to break through before even worrying about the next resistance, which, by the way, we've been rejected by multiple times over the past couple of weeks. So I think we're just going to continue to see this slow grind downward. Interestingly enough, the biggest volume days, and this was actually a very low volume day today for Palantir, but the biggest volume days in recent memory have been big sell days. So we can see here these blue lines are actually spikes in volume, and we had the big sell-off from all-time highs. More sell action here during this big blue candle. We had yet some more selling action during the big blue candle. And then even the biggest hourly candles here for volume-wise over the past couple of trading days have been selling action. So what that tells me is that retail traders are most likely losing favor of Palantir, taking their money and investing it in other things, and only really coming back to Palantir when they see it spiking. And that tends to be the mentality of retail traders, is when there isn't news going on, when there isn't a whole lot of volatility, especially when there's no upward volatility, then we tend to see people taking their money out, either taking profits, cutting losses, and moving it to the next big shiny object. And for the longest time, Palantir was the shiny object. You checked out Twitter and you checked out Reddit, and it was the stock that people were following. And a lot of people still do, but it's just not having the same luster that it previously had. So what do I think we're going to need to see in order to kind of break this downtrend that we've been in? We're going to ultimately need to see some sort of news events. As we saw back a couple Mondays ago, this 20% increase in price in one day happened just because of a $44 million contract, which is spread out over 3 years. If we want to assume that's $15 million a year, a $15 million a year FDA contract that ultimately spiked the price 20%, even though it's essentially only about 1% to 1.5% of next year's projected revenue. Also on the same day, there was a little bit of a reaffirmation of continuing to work with the Greek government, but there was no dollar value behind that. So solely that one news event led to about a 20% increase in price, and that actually warrants a little bit of the pullback that we've been seeing now. Now, I was following the stock for about a week, thinking that after we broke out of this wedge pattern, we were going to continue to see the stock rise. When we broke out of the wedge pattern, we actually broke out to the downside. And that's when I mentioned that I think we're going to continue to see this slow grind downward to about the 2460 level before investors are really going to have to consider whether or not it is a good opportunity to buy. And I think that ultimately, pending any sort of news event positive, that's what we're going to see next. So I pulled up Palantir's Q3 results, and they were actually sort of mentioning the same thing here, that the U.S. government sector is really their primary area of focus for their business, but investors don't love that because they actually don't have a ton of clients. If I remember correctly, it's about 15 deals with their current customers, each worth about $5 million. And the U.S. government is a very large portion of their overall revenue. So the biggest thing that investors are wanting to see, and this isn't just retail investors, but it's large institutions and probably ETFs and mutual funds that would consider adding Palantir, is just an expansion of their overall customer network. They mentioned themselves that they were working on growing their commercial segment and kind of breaking away from working with the government directly, because all of their eggs are really in one basket at this point. If they were to lose a lot of the government contracts, any sort of profitability, which by the way they have, excluding their costs for their direct listing, they had a profitable third quarter, but that all goes away if they lose some of these government contracts. And a lot of times you have to feel like if you lose favor from the government with one contract, you're going to lose that with a lot of the government contracts, if not all of them. So they're really working on growing their commercial sector contracts with other clients who are finding uses for their technology. They specifically mentioned that they have an aerospace client that has a $300 million contract and an oil and gas client that also has a very large contract and found use for that technology in order to save costs throughout their operations. So they're working on expanding that, but short of seeing some sort of contract signed that's ultimately going to get them a revenue increase or just have some positive news, at least for the future, I think we're going to continue to see the slow grind downward, where we're probably going to see consolidation, small sell-off, consolidation, small sell-off. What I want to keep an eye on, though, is these early morning spikes. There's institutions, large investors are coming in almost every morning pre-market and buying what would seem to be a large amount of shares. If we opened up the volume candle to see what the volume is on these candlesticks, we'll see that it's typically about 10 to 20,000 shares, but it's every single morning pre-market we're seeing little spikes in the price and then big selling volume when the market opens up. So the big selling volume could be institutions, it could be high frequency traders, but it's also a lot of retail traders are selling, taking profits, taking losses, moving to the next big shiny object. As I mentioned earlier, the people that are buying at 4 in the morning typically aren't retail traders, at least not in the dollar values and denominations that are currently being traded. So just something to keep an eye out for. If we keep seeing these big spikes in the morning, that could tell us that some big investor is loading up. And that leads me back to ARKW. So I covered a couple of videos ago that ARKW has been consistently buying Palantir nearly every single day. And so I promised that I'd follow up on that. Since actually showing ARKW and Lucid tracking, they've now added a chart, a couple of nice charts. This one I find interesting. We can see that basically they didn't own any Palantir and then slowly started scaling into their position until the middle of January, or the middle of November, and that's actually when we saw a big decrease in price and the beginning of the absolutely insane run-up that we've seen from about $13 per share all the way up to $33 before now trading at about $26. And ever since that time, they've been slowly scaling into the position to the tune of about $300,000 to $200,000 of shares every single day. What's interesting to note, though, is that they are keeping the weight within ARKW roughly the same. So we can see that they scaled up from basically 1/100% all the way up to about 0.75% of this overall fund. And after the decline in price of Palantir, we saw the weighting kind of come back down until they ultimately bought larger chunks at about 600 million and nearly 700 million. To bring the weighting back up to 0.75%. And then with the decline in price, we've actually seen that drop back down to about 0.65%. So they haven't quite thrown the level of money at the dips like they were previously. So we saw the price of Palantir dip down to about $28 per share after hitting that all-time high. And they were throwing something like 700 million. Now we've seen the price decline even further to about $26 per share, and they're only throwing about 100 to 150 million dollars at it now, and they're actually not even bringing the overall weight of Palantir within the portfolio back up to what seemed like their 0.75% target. Now, this may not be their strategy at all. I may just kind of be guessing what's going on here, but it seems that once the share or the weighting of Palantir dropped below 0.75%. They quickly bought it back up there, and then with the price decline, they've seen that decline back down, but haven't yet bought back in to the point that it brings it up to the same weighting. So that makes me wonder if they think that potentially it's going to fall more and that they would be able to plow some more money into the stock at a later time. In fact, we actually saw them drop almost all of their Slack holdings over the past couple of days. So they aren't afraid to dump a stock entirely. They're not doing that yet, though, and I tend to follow pretty closely what some of these ARK funds trade, because it can be a great indicator as to whether or not they think a stock is going to continue its current pattern, be that a sell-off or a run-up. And right now, they're not adding more Palantir, so that leads me to believe that possibly we could see a little bit more of a dip, because they haven't sold it off, so I'm sure that they don't think it's going to decline too much, but potentially that there's going to be a little bit more buying opportunity, and I think we'll see that as well with the stock falling back to this yellow support line. So that was just kind of my nightly thoughts on Palantir. I'm currently not adding. I probably won't add until we get down to the yellow support line. Until then, I'll just be averaging down by selling covered calls. I've got a couple active now, and then I've got about 500 shares that aren't covered in any way that I'm just going to kind of let ride. But the other couple hundred, I'm selling covered calls to bring the average down. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Is Palantir going to continue fading over the next couple of days down to the support line? Will it fall even further? Or is this just going to be a small consolidation pattern and we'll make a charge right back to the resistance levels at around 2770? Again, let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe if the video brought you value. Give the video a thumbs up. Thanks for stopping by and watching till the end, and I'll catch you in the next one.